We are live now. Okay, well, welcome everyone to the special meeting of Mahone Bay Town Council. It's a special budget meeting. We have been in camera for the last hour and a half, hour and a half, discussing contract negotiations. So we will now rejoin the public in the meeting, and we will continue. And I would note that it is 6:32 CAO, the time when we're back from in camera, and you have direction for staff from the in-camera meeting. Then we will continue with the remainder of our agenda. The only other item we have is discussion of the draft, the continuing discussion of the 2021 operating budget. Would you like to have at it?
If I can jump in on that, I want to add that from under the heading of, we do only have the one item, the discussion of the budget, but under that heading, we deferred 2 items from our last meeting on Tuesday evening for discussion. And those 2 items were a memo of additional budget notes prepared by the manager of finance, which is just provided for information, but if there are any questions on it, we can take them and I can put it on the screen, or Luke can put it on the screen. And the other item, which would require a little bit more discussion, was the province's draft property tax financing policy and the staff report in that regard. So I would suggest possibly that we start with the memo, see if there are any questions, and talk about the property tax financing policy as it may impact the budget before concluding with a round of, does anyone have any additional thoughts on the budget?
Okay. Maybe the next, if we ever had this occasion unfold again, we can get everything on the agenda that council is going to ask to approve.
The agenda got
Apologies
published before we decided to defer the items. Our meetings are back to back now.
I apologize to the mover and seconder of the motion on the agenda. However, let's go with Mr. Wenzel. Did you want to talk about your notes, or does anyone have any questions for Mr. Wenzel on the notes that he sent out?
And I think if there are no questions, we don't need to run through them. So
Okay.
Just supplemental.
We're good. Then let's go to the notes from the Minister of Finance.
You mean the proposed property tax financing program?
Yes.
Okay. So I think everybody has the staff report, but just in terms of background for anybody watching, obviously in the midst of COVID-19, there's been a lot of discussion in the province about possible ways that municipalities could provide additional relief to impacted businesses and residents. And in that vein, NSFM has been in negotiations with the province to develop an acceptable program and a system for financing assistance to individuals who may be having difficulty with their 2021 tax payments. So this is a model program that has been developed. It is available to municipalities, but each individual unit would need to make some determinations about the nuance of the program by policy and implement it if there is a desire to allow an application-based form of relief, again, for only 2021 taxes for residents and some qualifying businesses.
Okay. You all received the documentation, the sample policy that the CAOs have been working on for the last couple days. Questions or comments? Councillor Feeney.
Mayor, it's nice to see kind of a provincial-wide approach to this topic. And the union kind of weighing in with the overall solution. Whether we have much uptake here, Dylan, I guess would be the question, and whether, in your opinion, the administrative load, which would be notionally a lot higher for a small municipality like ours versus say HRM, which would have a lot more capacity and probably a lot more need for this type of a financing structure. So do you think we can handle the extra administrative load within the demand that we might have from the community?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of different questions in there. With regard to the administrative load, there definitely will be some increased amount of work. Right now, there's still negotiations with NSFM about having a provincial evaluation so that, all of these applications all over the province, whether they qualify for assistance, is something that a third party in the provincial government could make the determination. And then all we would have to do is we have a set amount based on the taxes billed, and we would cover that amount via this program. So that would certainly help. Otherwise, it's an important consideration that the model policy prescribes a built-in kind of service charge model intended to, and of course, we're not that flexible with casual labor and stuff, we're a small group, but intended to provide some compensation to the direct administrative costs. Also, one of the things we need to talk about in instituting a policy is that the model proposes taking the interest rate on any so I guess I should explain just in case anybody watching. The basic concept here is that the total of all of the folks in the community, businesses, individuals who do have hardship and do apply for relief on their 2020 taxes, if this is available, that total sum of money, if the town doesn't want to put up money from reserves, and I would suggest there's reason not to consider not doing, can be obtained through Municipal Finance Corp at 1.1% interest. And the model here proposes that 1.1% interest be charged on to the borrower, essentially providing them with a better cost of borrowing or line of credit than they could have, in any other context. And so in that sense, the town makes the determination whether to include in the administrative charges on this program that interest rate, which the model does recommend doing. So sorry, I might have missed one of the questions in there, Joe.
Okay, thank you.
That's good, Dylan, thanks.
Anyone
Oh,
else?
the other question you asked was about impacts in the community, or whether we were going to need or have a lot of uptake on this program. And so we did some preliminary modeling of, based on what the province gave us through AMA, here's your, how much your community is tourism-based commercial businesses, or, those type of metrics. And we used that to generate a number. And that number was fairly high. It was 620,000 we've talked about before. It was in the staff report. But when we look at the actual current situation, we've currently suspended the charging of interest and the disconnection of utility bills and tax sales just as a temporary relief. And council said that would be revisited, and this type of program would take the place eventually of that type of relief. But in that current context where individuals and businesses do not have to, if they are experiencing hardship, do not have to pay to avoid disconnection or tax sale, we are seeing a great willingness of residents and individuals who can pay to continue to make their payments. Even with the office closed, people who can pay are continuing to pay, as they should be doing. And so we're not experiencing a big cash shortflow issue right now. Now, that being said, when we actually have a program, if we have a program and we go out and we ask for applications, I would anticipate that we will have enough come in that we would be advised to go to MFC and borrow. And my recommendation to council was that if we do institute this kind of a program, we consider rolling all the costs of the borrowing and the administration into the cost to the borrower. Or alternatively, we should revisit the general stance in this budget against the tax increase this year, on account of we would be paying the amount of money we're deferring from deferring taxes. We'd be spending that administering this program and covering everybody's interest. So it does become a bit of an either or, unless the program is constructed in such a way that there is no additional cost to the rest of the taxpayers, that it's just the individual participating. You're on mute, David.
Just sending an email to Kelly Redden to ask her if we're online. Somebody just poked their head in the door and said that it's not on YouTube right now. So anyway, we'll see what she says. Okay.
It is live right now.
Is it? Thank
Yeah.
you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Okay, any other comments or questions on that? There will be more information coming out, CAO.
Yeah, I think at this point that the question that I would have from council is, if we feel that, because obviously we don't have draft policy right now, but this is a pretty time sensitive issue, If we feel that we would like to adopt a policy and we would like it to not impact the budget, and we go on tonight and we have any kind of decisions around the budget that will be approved on the 12th, and we're not changing anything to put money in for this policy, then staff would prepare a policy based on the model policy, but with the assumption that it is going to, as the model does, take all of the costs associated with the program and roll that into the cost of the individual. So we can do the Mahone Bay version of that policy and
Okay.
provide that to council. It won't be in time for the package for the 12th. But I think what we should do is we should provide it to council by email with any other updates from AMA
Okay.
Incorporated. And that way, when there does come a time when hopefully maybe as soon as the 28th of May, we're in a position to have a draft and consider whether we're going to put it in place. Because the timing is fairly sensitive to setting an application deadline and potentially tying to that application deadline an end to the current suspension of interest charges to all accounts. So, we do need to decide, when do we switch from short-term relief to a longer form of targeted relief? And with the due dates of our bills and everything else considered,
Okay.
and the province pushing for the 30th of June, I think we should try to get a draft together as soon as we can.
Okay, Councillor Bain, you're on mute, but you wanted to say something. You're on mute, John.
Problem with this.
There you go.
Yeah, it now says mute, but I guess it's just the way it is. So anyway,
Oh, you got one of those.
I agree with the CAO. I think if he can get the information out to us so that when it does become imminent, we can act on it fairly quickly, even if it's done by email or some other form
Okay.
of a quick Zoom meeting or something like that. Thank you.
So we would entertain a motion directing staff to prepare the Mahone Bay version of the policy as presented and discuss with the CAOs across the province. Someone want to move that motion?
So moved.
Okay, moved by the deputy mayor, second by Councillor O'Neill. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you.
All right, so that actually brings us around to the discussion of the 2020-21 budget, the current form of which, again, sorry, the package, of course, didn't go out as a package ahead of the deadline because we deferred this from a meeting that just happened, but Luke did make changes to the budget based on the direction last time, and we did send that around for you, and I can put stuff up on the screen. Luke can put stuff up on the screen. I guess I should say Luke can put stuff up on the screen, and because I'll be taking notes about any motions that are made, and we can entertain any further motions. The hope would be tonight, but we don't absolutely have to, of course, so it's a council's discretion, that the final thing that we do tonight would be a notice of motion to ourselves that this budget would be up for approval on the 12th. And so last year, what we did was we put it under council items because there had been a notice of motion from this meeting. And the motion would be that council adopt the 2021 budget as presented, which at that point it would be presented. The final thing that we do tonight would be a notice of motion to ourselves that this.
Just making sure that we're on.
Gonna say that's unnerving. I don't
Gotta
watch
turn it
myself for a
around, you
reason.
gotta watch yourself. Okay. Luke, you want to walk us through the remaining or the changes that you've got?
Basically, we just took the direction from council from last time. I can call the current document up on the screen. I've got it up here somewhere.
This is the quick version.
The changes last time around were all to the capital budget, eh, Luke?
Yes.
So we moved a couple, I think 3 projects off of the current year. The car share, winterizing washrooms, and expansion of the wharf comfort station.
Correct. Those were the 3 items that we took off the capital budget. And so those changes have been made here around page 80 or so. And then the other updates would have been to page
Grants
I don't know why that came out so
allocations in
small,
there.
but yeah, so the total grants here is approved at
Yeah,
the
and then
last
the-
meeting and the allocation of those.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of I guess the results of the award of the contract at the last meeting's also in here too, I think. That helped
The 60,000 or
Yeah,
Yeah.
we made that
yeah,
adjustment in here, yeah.
for the MPS LUB review, right? But yeah, I think those were the only real changes that were made from the last version. So if there's any other questions or anything, we can definitely have a discussion or anything at this point in time.
I will note, because we didn't have any, final decisions around the capital budget item we talked about on Tuesday night with respect to the fire station project, that we are still sticking with the budget estimate in there that was included in the 2019-20 budget. And what we'll do is we will have a report to council recommending that we proceed to a design build tender. And at that time, we can look at the financial analysis of the proposed cost. So it won't, in the budget, if we're recommending it tonight, we're just going to recommend continuing to use the number that's in there for the fire station project, understanding that we are approaching the issuance of documents.
Okay,
Luke, I just had one final question regarding capital, and then on my part, for my part, I'm prepared to move along and put that baby to bed. If on slide 72 and 73, and we did have an email today that you provide some clarity around this new reserve that you're carving out called the gas tax reserve.
Correct.
And that's a new line item, but it really is, if you flip back to 70, I guess page 72, that's the two lines, right? Am I reading? So when I look at the general capital fund is made up of the gas tax fund and the gas tax reserve and the capital reserve.
That's correct.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
That's great. So when I look at your slide 73, I just want to make sure, because I just want to make this point one more time, just so we're all, when I look at the capital reserve income, is what you're saying there is, when you're saying income, is that the revenue that's coming into that reserve? Is that what we're trying? So this is the area dividend, the infrastructure fee, and the D-transfer.
D-transfer. That's correct. Yes.
It's that's the net
net.
as presented in the following page, I think page 77, the following page where it presents the capital in and capital allocation, and then the net is for reserve. Yeah.
That was the question. So that number is the net, not
Correct.
the gross.
Right.
Okay. Fair enough. I think that was the final question. And I also noticed, Luke, you made the change on the Park Cemetery to include the receivable.
Yep.
So thank you very much.
Not a problem.
I have a few questions on the operating side, Mayor, but I'll wait till we get there.
yeah, I'm waiting for the page to change.
We can ask here before we move off of capital, and we can go back and do one last round if anybody have questions about the operating. But before we do, any other comments or questions around the capital budget?
I had a comment.
Sure. Go ahead.
This is in response to a letter received by a resident who has a property on an unserviced lot and had some questions regarding the capital infrastructure charge. And specifically that in our last meeting, we discussed increasing that capital infrastructure charge by a dollar value of about $20. And I just wanted to table it here. I feel like this would be likely our last opportunity to discuss it as a council prior to ratifying this year's budget. So I thought it was appropriate to discuss that charge again, so that it is perhaps better understood by everyone who may be watching in terms of what it represents. I will say that as I was campaigning to be on council, practically to a person of households when I was on unserviced lots mentioned this infrastructure charge with similar comments to what would have been in the letter received, such that, you know, the initial charge was conceived of as a sewer charge that was absorbed by unserviced lots as a greater good gesture to the town. But that charge then morphed into a more general infrastructure charge that has a benefit to all capital projects in the town. And I just wanted to table that to this council to see if there was anything that we wanted to revisit with respect to this year's infrastructure charge increase.
Your worship?
Yes, please, Councillor Carver.
Yes, earlier today, I asked if it was possible to have two versions of the budget, one with the infrastructure as is, and another one with the increase included. Is that something that could be done on the spot with a quick calculation?
You just want to know the difference in the balance of the capital reserve as a result, or?
Or what difference it would make in the overall result in the budget summary?
Yeah, well, that's the only impact of this will be on the capital reserve balance at the end of the year.
Right.
So Luke, I'm sure Luke can, that.
Because I'm uncomfortable in supporting the increase in the absence of the
About
policy.
It's about $17,000, I think, right? Give or take.
17,000?
Hmm.
Right. I'm reluctant to support an across the board increase of the $20 in the absence of clarity in our policy.
Councillor Carver,
Mayor?
just the policy is very clear. What kind of
Yeah.
clarity are we looking for?
Or a review of it in terms of whether or not it's fair to the people who are on unserviced lots.
Deputy Mayor, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I do. Councilor Carver, you voted for a $20 increase.
I did, but I am questioning that.
I guess that's
I
right.
don't quite understand why you're laughing.
Well, I mean, you voted for something and now you want to rescind your vote. Just because of one letter.
That is my prerogative.
Okay,
I guess it's your prerogative to laugh.
well, I didn't laugh, I smiled.
Okay, Mr. Hyde, do you feel the policy is clear about the charge, the infrastructure charge? And I think the other discussion we've had is how we use it.
Yeah, I would say it's clear in both cases. So the infrastructure charge is levied on properties irrespective of whether they have in front of them any particular sort of criteria of infrastructure. So we don't say that you have to have in front of your property a sewer line, or you don't have to have a water line, or you don't have to have a road or sidewalk. Theoretically, the town could take an approach where the infrastructure charge was somehow proportionate to those availability of those services directly to your property. However, those services do support the rest of the community that you live in. If you go anywhere in the community, you're utilizing public services such as their roadways. And so, there's no attempt to make a connection between the levying of that infrastructure charge on every property in town and the services that are being received for it. It's going to support, we had a good conversation, we've had a number of them, about the shoreline project on Edgewater Street. Residents who don't live on Edgewater Street benefit from preserving Highway 3 and the churches and the use of that by the community. So, obviously it's not only residents who live on that street who would support or potentially benefit from having their capital infrastructure monies contributed to that type of project. So I think the thing that's clear about the policy is there is no connection between the argument being made that this property is unserviced and the application of this charge, because that's not how it's calculated. And then just with respect to the mayor's point about how it's used, 100% of the infrastructure charge it's used entirely for capital. There's three things it can be used for. It can pay principal payments on capital, which is capital we've already done. it can go to current year capital if there's current year capital out of revenue that we happen to be doing, or it can go into the capital reserve for next year or future year capital. We're prohibited by the policy. We can't do anything else with that money. And so it was raised in discussion, some of the money is allocated under in the budget under capital, sort of revenue available to fund capital projects. Those include a number of sources. So the infrastructure charge is one of the sources. Other sources there include the area dividend, deed transfer tax. And so there is noted in this budget a recommended transfer to operating reserve from those funds. That would not be any of the funds that are coming from the infrastructure charge. We're prohibited from doing that. That would be the funds coming from, and not even all of them, but the recommendation is to take some of the funds from just this year coming in under the deed transfer or area and use that for an operating reserve transfer. At the end of the day, those funds are not allocated by policy or convention or anything else. And the other units don't have restrictions on how those funds are used. It's a great practice that we use them for capital, but there's a recommendation that we make a variance in light of the particular circumstances of this year. And I'm sure we'll be talking about that recommendation soon. I just bring it up in order to really to drive home the fact that all of the monies collected by the infrastructure charge are used for capital, and that's a requirement. So again, I don't think there's a lack of clarity in the policy in that regard.
Okay. Councillor O'Neill, thank you, CAO.
Yes, I just want to thank you for that very in-depth and well-rationalized description. I very much appreciate that. So what would follow then is if there would be any conversation that would look at the impact of the infrastructure tax to serviced and unserviced lots, then that would not be taken up at this moment. That would be more of a question for the capital infrastructure bylaw, where we might create a tiered system at a later date. Is that correct?
I would suggest just some analysis in response to this request that came in could be done, and we could change that. It would impact future years. But yeah, in terms of the current status of this budget, we just have a single charge and it's levied on all properties irrespective of the services at that particular geographic location.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Councillor Now.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate something along what Dylan was saying. The infrastructure charge or that charge is there for all the infrastructure that we do with capital expenses. They all use the roads, they all use all the other infrastructure. They might not have water and sewer to their homes, but as far as water goes, there's fire hydrants near all those properties. In case of an emergency or anything like that, the fire department has access to those to help combat those situations.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Mayor, just a quick comment.
Yes, please.
So one of the things when I first joined council 3.5 years ago and went through the very first budget deliberation process was a recommendation to increase this fee, which to my knowledge had not been touched in 12 previous years. Another thing we did was we also took the opportunity to increase the deed transfer tax, and we've done that on subsequent occasions as well. And we've done those things proactively to try to put ourselves in a position to have a capital reserve that is in place now that we're looking at, I think on one of these pages, Luke, close to $800,000, where when this council came into its mandate, the capital reserve was under $100,000. So these decisions are not done without acknowledgement of the consideration of the taxpayers. It's really trying to set ourselves up to be able to responsibly make the big capital investments that the taxpayers need and want. And I think when we look back in the rearview mirror, some of these decisions have really served us well over the last 4 years. This is one I do think has some merit to talk about evolution down the road. Can this infrastructure charge be moderated and changed in different ways? Should we have tiers? Should we have a tier specific to the corporate users versus residential users, fair enough. So I just think in due course, maybe it is a good idea to take a look at this.
My only comment back would be, we would not have tiers when it comes to spending the money.
Fair enough.
Right? Regardless of what property you're in, if the sewer is going by your door or the water's going by your door, we're all going to get the same piece of the pie to access the service.
Mhm.
And I also notice most of you people have got sidewalks and I don't have one. And my street's only 12 feet wide, so. Okay. So is there an issue with the infrastructure charge at this point
I think
that we
we've
want
dealt
to
with that
pursue,
well
or
at the
will it
last
come
meeting.
up later? Sorry?
I would say if we don't hear anything from anyone, then there's nothing, and someone can make
Okay.
a motion now if they want to change anything.
Let's move on. Mr. Wenzel.
Okay, I
We
mean,
were just in the review of capital, and that's where
right.
Councillor O'Neill had raised this question. We've talked
Yep.
about, were there any others under capital that anyone wanted to bring up? And then we can do a final ask if there's any others under operating.
Okay. So I won't go through the detailed operating side, but are there any questions, concerns, comments on any of the operating expenses or any operating initiatives or anything of that sort?
Mhm.
There-
All right.
Oh, Joe, I
It's
think you're-
interesting. There's a little glitch going on with the mutes. I see. I think I'm having the same problem that Councilor Bain's having. Specifically on the operating line items, whether we want to dive back into them line by line. And I take the CAO's point about the one-time nature of the transfer from the capital reserves to the operating initiatives, which I've spoken about a few times, and I don't think anyone needs to hear me speak about it a fourth or fifth time. You've heard, you kind of know where I stand on the topic.
Oh, come on, do it anyway.
But what I would say, honestly, is maybe this is an opportunity for us in a very, high level way. Maybe we'd be better off just trying to ask staff to come back with a view on total spending within the expense lines. Basically, instead of having council micromanage the individual line items, maybe we could just ask for a version that would come back which would kind of look at the entire portfolio of expenses. And that would include things like, the council's expenses this year. Like, I don't know, in a COVID situation, I'm not sure how high they'll be. The mayor's spent expenses this year. I'm not sure how high they'll be. The CAOs, for example. I mean, should we just, given the circumstance we're in, should we just sort of just take a pass and say, okay, we're going to reduce those by 40%? When I look at the overall budget and I see the increase year over year. So 3 years ago, we were doing $2.3 million of expenses. 2 years ago, we were doing 2.4. Last year, we were doing 2.5, but this year we're doing 2.8. And I know it's an unusual year. I think Luke's notes spoke well to that point. I'm just wondering if it makes sense to take another kick at the can kind of at a portfolio level and see if we can reduce some of the expenses. Maybe we can go from 2.8 to 2.6 and we'll end up in a good spot and we can move along.
So Joe, just to respond to that, so the memo that we skipped past here tonight, Luke went through and looked at the actual, what are the actual increases in department costs, and most of them are relatively small. And what we ended up with as a result of those actual increases was the $54,000 number. I think it is at this point. Luke, you want to skip back to the breakdown of the transfer from operating reserve? I think there's 54,000 approximately to cover the shortfall that deferring tax increase would make up. So I'm assuming we're kind of zeroing in on that number. And I would grant that we could go through the budget and just arbitrarily try to find $54,000 of places where the best case scenario could be written instead of the worst case scenario. And we don't really work in a budgeting by best case scenario, because our job is to deliver council a budget that at least is a surplus and not a deficit. And what I'd like to kind of say about that is it, what would that do? So it's 55,170. Thank you. So what would that do? So if we went through and we changed it so that that number wasn't there, the projected balance of the operating reserve would be higher, would be $55,000 higher. And then we go through the year, and let's say Luke and I were right initially, and we do spend more money and we do come in a little bit higher. Well, we'll have a deficit. And how do we fund the deficit? We go to the operating reserve for $55,000 or up to. If in the reverse scenario, we leave the budget the way it is and we do well for the year, and last year we did very well, that $55,000 would be reduced. So similarly, if we don't spend $8,000 on the mayor's expenses because he can't go anywhere all year because of COVID, we have the choice. We can either reduce that number by $8,000 now, or we can just leave that number, and then at the end of the year, if we didn't spend it, we don't transfer it from the reserve. So it's really more of a question at that point of the philosophy behind budgeting. Luke and I wanted to present a worst case scenario operating reserve transfer to show that in the worst case scenario, we can afford to cover this from the operating reserve. And it was really that worst case scenario thinking that led us to think that, well, we actually will still have a pretty good balance in the operating reserve, even in this worst case scenario. So let's recommend a deferral of taxes as a manner to help people during COVID, rather than an actual increase for that 55,000. Similarly, I think it wouldn't make sense to try to look for reductions if the reductions are not real. But of course, based on last year, I have confidence we'll overperform these expectations even during COVID. I mean, we are very conscious of costs as staff. And you're right, we probably won't be traveling or incurring a lot of expenses. I know my expense claim for the month of April was absolutely zero, and I can't think of another month where that's been that way.
Well, fair enough. Take that point. And the one thing I think all the council will agree about how transparent the entire process has been. Every number's been, delineated. And any question we've had, there's been quick, prompt answers back from staff. So, honestly, I couldn't be happier with how forthcoming you and Luke have been. I mean, this is a incredible process, and to see how it's evolved, it's really quite a piece of work.
It does improve every year. And for me, not being a bean counter like Councillor Feeney, the easier, the more clear you can make the budget process, the easier it is for me to understand, and it gives me a more confident feeling in approving the budget.
Well, thanks to you both for those comments. And we can, if there are any other comments at this time or questions, just continue on.
Yep, please. I guess so. I can't see any.
And if there are no others, like I said, we are at 7:10. So when we do run out of things that anyone has to say, we can put down a notice of motion. That would be the normal protocol.
All right. Deputy Mayor? No?
I'm fine, Your Worship, and I do want to thank Dylan and Luke for the excellent work they did with the document.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor O'Neill?
No further comments, but absolutely want to reiterate the thanks for the strong work.
Thank you. Councillor Carver?
No comments, thank you, except thank you for to the staff for their support and good work.
Thank you. Now the old man on the hill, Councillor Bain.
Thank you. I agree with all the comments. I think it's been a step forward as far as the budgeting process goes.
Good. Councillor Now?
Just to reiterate what everybody else has said, no comments on the budget itself, but I think it was another great job done by staff this year.
Great. Looks like, Luke, you can go home early tonight and maybe get to bed by 11 o'clock.
Yahoo!
Yeah, we're going to get the package out as soon as this meeting ends. We're going to be sending you your package for your next meeting on Tuesday.
Good. someone wish to make a notice of motion?
So moved, your worship.
Okay,
Seconded.
notice of motion is moved and seconded that at the meeting on the 12th CAO, the budget will be presented to council for approval. Okay, thank you very much. Is that it?
Yeah, that's the end of the regular agenda here for
Gee whiz.
tonight. I just want to remind before we stop that we take a minute when we are at the adjournment, once it has been adjourned, and before we all hang up, we ask if there are any questions from Facebook
Yes,
or
thank you.
YouTube. Sorry.
Okay, motion to adjourn,
So moved.
moved, seconded. Is that Councillor Bain? We are adjourned. Let's find out if we have any questions from the citizens.
No questions.
No questions?
No questions.
All right,
Excellent.
that's it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
We'll
Have a
see
good
you
night.
later.
Good night. Have a good sleep. Stay
Have a
safe.
good night, everyone.
Good
Thanks,
night.
everyone.